welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. But today on the show, it is one of our backwards episodes. We call them Breaking It Apart, where we take a look at an older movie and what movies it might have inspired. And this is one I knew we'd eventually get around to. I've been doing this show for 6 years now, and I've only really done like a little over a dozen of these Breaking It Apart episodes, and I knew I'd eventually have to get to Die Hard, because what action movie inspired more movies than Die Hard? And honestly, we could have done this episode for like 2 hours just naming movies, but we got a lot of great movies to talk about on this episode, and joining me, I've got Sean O'Connell from CinemaBlend, who also has a new book out, Bruce Willis Celebrating the Cinematic Legacy of an Unbreakable Hollywood Icon. So, great guest to talk about Die Hard and Bruce Willis and the film's impact and some of the movies that it inspired. So that's coming up here in a second. Before we get to it, I do want to remind you, as always, to make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together wherever it is that you're listening right now. We have a lot of episodes on the way. I think we've got like 7 episodes in the can at the moment, so lots coming your way. So make sure you are subscribed. You could also follow us on social media at PiecingPod and join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we continue the conversation about all the movies we talk about here on the show. I also want to let you know about our Patreon, the Produced by David Rosen Patreon, where I post bonus and advanced content from Piecing It Together, including video versions of some episodes, including this one right now. So if you're like, oh, I want to hear these guys talk about Die Hard, but I'd rather watch them talk about Die Hard, just go sign up for the Patreon. The video version is there exclusively, along with a bunch of other episodes and early access to episodes. So it's patreon.com/bydavidrosen. There's also bonus episodes from Awesome Movie Year on there and exclusive music from my music career. So again, check it out. And with that said, let's get on to this conversation about Die Hard. All right, we are going to be doing what may just very well be the easiest episode of Breaking It Apart ever here on Piecing It Together. We're talking Die Hard, and joining me, I've got Sean O'Connell from CinemaBlend, ReelBlend, and author of the new book, Bruce Willis, Celebrating the Cinematic Legacy of an Unbreakable Hollywood Icon. Sean, how are you doing?
I'm great, man. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This is one that I feel like eventually I would have gotten around to for this particular form of the show, these backwards episodes of Breaking It Apart, where we look at an older movie and what it inspired. But I'm happy to finally be getting to that. And with your book coming out, it seems like the perfect time. So happy to talk about it. But before we get into Die Hard, tell my listeners a little about you and yourself and about the book.
Sure. I'm the managing editor at CinemaBlend. I've been with them for about 11 years, but I've been covering entertainment journalism for close to 25 years now at this point. And so, have watched various trends, in the industry, rises and falls of different things that drive people to the audience. And in fact, we're kind of in the middle of some really fascinating study about why
Mm.
people are or are not going back to the movies.
Oh, yeah.
Um, the advent of streaming and all this jazz. And so when you talk about a movie like Die Hard, when you talk about an actor like Bruce Willis, he really is the last of sort of this, fading era of movie stars where people went to go see something because of whose name was above the title, and it wasn't IP driven and it wasn't, for these franchises. In fact, Bruce, miraculously, he has a few sequels to his resume, but like he had plenty of other opportunities to do follow-ups to some of his more popular films and never really chose to go that direction, would always sort of be driven by the directors that he could collaborate with,
Mm-hmm.
or a genre that he wanted to play around in. And so but it's part of the reason why I kind of wanted to dive into his career and analyze the choices that he made. And so it's very much what you do here on the show, which is take a success or a failure and then sort of figure out what decisions came after the fact and influence the directions that he went in. Because with Bruce, I find it to be a little surprising.
Yeah, I think, we'll talk a little more about the book later, and I have a few questions for you about Bruce and about, the decisions going into making this book, but I think that that's going to come up a bunch because he is one of these actors that we just don't see anymore that is successful in everything, basically, like in every aspect of movies. So yeah, it'll be interesting to talk about him a little bit. But let's talk a little bit about Die Hard. I mean, before we get into puzzle pieces, you were you a big fan of Die Hard when it first came out? Did you come to it later? Where were you at with this whole series?
It's the first R-rated movie that I got to see in theaters.
Perfect. Nice.
I remember specifically to the day, my mom buying me the ticket at the booth, and then her and her sister, my aunt, shopped in a mall while
Hmm.
I went in by myself and watched the movie.
Nice.
And without exaggeration, it changed my life. Like
Hmm.
it's the movie that inspired me to look at films differently.
Hmm.
Um, I knew even then it was a perfect movie. I knew I was watching something that's rare, you know?
Yeah.
And so then in the years that followed, all I wanted to do was figure out how they did, like, how did you construct a movie that has 0 fat, where every
Sure.
scene matters, every line of dialogue sets up something that pays off later. Um, but specifically as well too, I kinda was I grew up the class clown, and so to see a hero on the big screen, who was this, flying in the face of authority,
Sure.
sarcastic, quippy, um, scared, but brave, like all
Hmm.
these qualities of John McClane that I just on a organic level, connected with,
Yeah.
and came to realize that Bruce just has this relatability that he brings to, so many roles. But here I was seeing it for the first time on the biggest screen possible and just being like, I need to figure out who that dude is, and
Sure.
basically follow his career. So
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I can't remember what the first R-rated movie I saw was, but I do think Die Hard with a Vengeance. I'm sure we'll talk about the sequels a little bit later, but I think that might have been the first time I went to the movies by myself without my parents, and also the first movie that I saw more than 3 or 4 times in the theater because I
nice.
went back so many times to see Die Hard with a Vengeance. It was definitely like a favorite movie at that point. But yeah, that's an awesome story though of this being your first R-rated movie because that is a formative experience. So
Oh my
that is
gosh.
great. Yeah,
A seminal
everything
film.
you just said about Bruce is like exactly why I think we all love him so much. But yeah, great stuff there. Let's start getting into the puzzle pieces. There are, like I said at the beginning, this is such a I don't want to call it an easy episode necessarily, but there are so many things to pick from that this movie influenced or inspired. But let's get into it. What do you have for your first one?
So I'm going. Some of them are blatant. You have to choose them. But in an effort to hopefully avoid some of your choices as well too, like I wanted to get a little creative. But I have to
Sure.
start here. Obviously, Die Hard inspired this entire genre of rip-off films, whose premise, when the people went into the studio to pitch it, was basically just like, hey, it's Die Hard on fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And the best of those has to be Speed. I
Sure.
have to start with Speed. Um, in the fact that it has a couple of the same qualities. It's limited to a location, driven by the villain who's keeping our hero there. Keanu, is the closest to regular cop, not this sort of, Terminator-esque, can't be stopped. He's flawed. He's figuring it out, in the moment sort of thing. Some things don't work,
Yeah.
as he's trying to stop the villain. And yes, speed goes off the rails a little bit in its, third act as it transitions over to the train, and then you have these sort of elements, but everything limited to the bus, it has all of the qualities that I think make Die Hard so special, and I'm gonna have to credit Jan de Bont for that.
Hmm.
Cinematographer under McTiernan on Die Hard, transitions over to the director's chair. I'm sure borrowed a lot of stuff from McTiernan on Speed, so I got to go with that for my first pick.
Yeah, it's funny. Obviously, we're gonna have some overlap here, and that would have been my first pick too, with the exact same reason. It's like the ultimate Die Hard on a fill in the blank. So I will pivot for my first puzzle piece and just go with that exact same premise for a piece and go with Under Siege for
Nice.
Die Hard on a boat. Uh,
Mhm.
Probably the only Seagal movie that holds up really well. I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen it in a while, but Definitely as far as the 90s and being able to sell things on Die Hard on, and I do think Speed is probably the best example of that.
Mhm.
As far as just nonstop action, looks great. It is all the things that you want out of an action movie just smashed together and just go, go, go for the whole runtime. Also, incredible villains. That is always like a touchstone of these movies. Like you just got to have a villain that you don't want to root for necessarily, but you can't wait for every minute of their screen time. It is definitely a formula, and you could tell why it became such a kind of catchphrase of the 90s. So I think between Speed and Under Siege, you have two examples of that. Under Siege, of course, being the on the boat version, but essentially a similar setup. It just happens to be a different kind of location. And yeah, I think Speed and Under Siege as the first two examples of this are really a good place to kind of set the tone here of this conversation.
I think so. Let's not forget Speed 2, which also tried to do on a boat,
Not as
but failed.
successful. Yeah.
Failed, yeah.
Absolutely. What's
For number
next?
2,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with an actor who, gets lumped into Bruce's category quite often. It's his Planet Hollywood cohort, Sylvester Stallone.
Mm,
You talk about Bruce Willis movies, and it's often him and Stallone and Schwarzenegger. These
sure.
these 3 guys were kinda running for multiple projects, and I'm going with Cliffhanger
Hmm.
because I think that Stallone, for a couple of projects post Die Hard, kinda said to his people, like, "Find me that project."
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wanna replicate that somehow, and so Cliffhanger to me is Stallone's effort to do, the single guy in a location, in a mission. It's the side of a mountain. It's a little
Yeah.
bit bigger, Stallone tends to do everything a little bit bigger. But again, some of the things you point out, Lithgow, terrific villain,
Hmm.
uh, great stunt work. Rennie Harlan, who tackles, Die Hard 2, starts to apply some of the things that he learned in that franchise over to Cliffhanger, and so I'm going with that as my second choice.
Yeah, it's a good one. I forgot about that Rennie Harlan did Die Hard too. That's a great like tying that together there really well. But yeah, I think Stallone and in that era is so trying to say like, please get me a script as tight as Die Hard. Like I want that movie. Like and doing that over and over again and not quite reaching those heights, but Cliffhanger is a really good example of that. And it's one that I was thinking about, although I did not put on my list. But yeah, great piece there to include. I wanted to kind of jump around genres a little bit just to kind of show some influence on not just action movies. And so for my next one, I have
Mhm.
1990s Home Alone as a puzzle piece here. I feel like the idea of
Great choice.
outsmarting the bad guys, and it's just a fun,
Yeah.
clever way. And in a way, I guess you could kind of go back to McTiernan's previous film Predator for that too. Like outsmarting the villain of the movie is kind of a fun way to set up a movie where you want to see whether or not each little thing is going to work out and it's gonna play through, and if you're gonna get that whole thing of like a setup and a win in each sequence, and those kinds of set pieces are so much fun to watch. And Home Alone does it to great comedic effect, and your villains are memorable and over the top, and you can't wait to see them every single time they're on screen. So even though it's a completely different kind of movie, different kind of stakes, you can see the setup and release kind of thing going on there.
Terrific choice. That is a
Right on.
terrific choice.
Right on. Yeah, absolutely. What do you got next?
I'm gonna pick another Bruce movie, and I'll explain to you why I think that its influence, is affected by Die Hard.
Hmm.
I'm going with Hudson Hawk.
Okay.
Hudson Hawk to me, is the purest distillation of what Bruce Willis wanted to do. These are the types of movies that he wanted to make.
Hmm.
And if the movie was received differently, if it was accepted, if fans liked it, I think we would have had 7 Hudson Hawk movies as opposed to 5 Die Hard films.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, it's kinda noted that post the first Die Hard, Bruce wanted John McClane to go back to being, very serious. He didn't like the levity that was injected into the Die Hard franchise because Bruce had a very specific sense of humor, and it was on display in Hudson Hawk. It's kinda Looney Tunes inspired.
Mhm.
It's a lot of broad physical comedy. It's kind of silly. People forget that Bruce also had an aspirational music career,
Yeah,
and that
sure.
goes a little bit back to even moonlighting, which where he wasn't afraid to sort of break out into song. Hudson Hawk sort of married the action piece with the music piece, and tried to mash them together into a movie. And because it was so wholly rejected by the audience, I think it forced Bruce to keep going back to the traditional action well over and over again.
Mm.
And so I think as he explored what to do in a post Die Hard landscape, which it affected him more than anything else. Everybody's sort of saying like, "Hey, just do John McClane," sort of thing. I think he
Yeah.
tried to do something different, and it backfired. And because of that, Hudson Hawk, lives in the shadow of Die Hard, and affected the types of movies that Bruce made going forward.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I haven't seen it since probably it came out, and I've always wanted to rewatch it because of that sense of humor that's on display in it. And I feel like I'd probably love it as an adult, like going back to it and just seeing that. I lately everything I like has been like goofy as hell, so I feel like I would probably really like it. Um, the one thing I always remembered about Hudson Hawk, and we could maybe tangent about Die Hard video games because there's been a bunch of them, but do you remember there was a Hudson Hawk video game? That seems like the strangest property to make a video game out of, but they tried everything back then, so
I don't know if I even knew
so
that
weird.
existed.
Yeah.
It sounds awesome. I would love to find it.
Yeah, it was on the Game Boy, I remember, but, yeah, amazing what they would try to do back then, but, great pick. I love, talking about Bruce's, his comedic sensibilities, and so I think that's a good one to include here. Um, I'm gonna go with the Has Fallen series, for my next
Oh,
pick. Olympus Has Fallen. Gerard Butler, even though he has not been as successful in trying to do lots of different kinds of movies, like we were just talking about, Bruce Willis can kind of do, he does the award type stuff, he does comedies, he does action, of course. And Gerard Butler's kind of just straightforward in the action movies as far as his career has been. But he's certainly trying to do the John McClane thing in these Has Fallen movies. And I feel like he's trying to be the heir apparent to that, and to some degree, he's succeeding. I mean, they've made three of them, and they're making a fourth one, and people do like these movies, even if they're maybe not the best action movies. And I think that could be said for most of the Die Hard sequels, honestly, other than with a
sure.
Vengeance, which I do love, like I said earlier. But it's that kind of reliability of an action hero. And I think that Gerard Butler does that even in something like Plane a couple years ago, which we're getting a sequel of. He is reliable and people know what they're getting when they show up for that movie. And that's something that I think for a lot of Bruce Willis's career, you could say about him as an action star.
Mhm. Yeah, without question. That has to be Gerard Butler's most quietly successful franchise. You go back
Hmm.
and look at the box office of those movies, they kill.
Yeah.
They're international, hits.
Yeah.
And so of course I could see why he'd keep going back to that franchise. It's very rewarding for him. And when he branches outside of it, he doesn't do very well. So people want to see him in that quote unquote has fallen franchise.
Yeah, absolutely. I We'll see if the next one's good. I hope so. I'm always rooting for Butler. He's fun when he's good. Den of Thieves 2 next year, can't wait. But what do you have for your next piece?
All right. I am going to go with what I think is and should be the final attempt at anybody to replicate the Die Hard formula,
Hmm.
which is 2011's film The Raid,
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
quintessential action film, and takes the equation of overmatched hero in a single location. Here it is action phenom Iko Uwais, who people have seen he was in Mile 22 with Mark Wahlberg, but this was his announcement to the industry. And it's
Hmm.
essentially a police officer. It feels like a video game. It's a video game movie. It's a police officer who has to figure out how to get to the top level of
Yeah.
a dilapidated building, essentially. And it's him just working his way through armies of people. Some of the most inventive fight choreography you'll ever see. Um, but again, a hero who can bleed, a hero who, takes a beating, nothing's more discouraging to me than nowadays the Rock and Jason Statham having in their contract how many times they can get hit,
Yeah.
and never showing themselves bleeding, you know. By the end of the raid, our hero is a pulp, and that's quintessential Bruce also. And it's think about that scene where Bruce confronts Hans Gruber, at the very end of Die Hard, where he's just coated in his own his own blood,
Oh,
and
yeah.
barely able to stand. That's the hero I want. I don't want the unstoppable because there's no tension. There's no dramatic tension in that. There's no suspense. Is our hero actually going to make it? Well, if he can single-handedly disperse of an army of people without breaking a sweat, that's not interesting to me, and that's why I love the raid. With the raid, I never really believed that our hero was gonna make it to the top level of this building, and
Sure.
so, it's some of the most suspenseful action films I've ever seen, and I'm not quite sure that anybody can top it.
Yeah, the raid is awesome and a great pick here. And it's funny, inevitably, whenever we're doing a regular piecing it together episode on some new movie and it takes place in, some kind of tower type structure, Die Hard comes up as a puzzle piece and the raid comes up as a puzzle piece. There are two movies that,
Nice.
absolutely inspired that kind of structure of like the hero having to make his way up against waves and waves of bad guys, like you said, very video game like. And yeah, the raid just does it so well. And I love that too, that connection about how he's just like, he's just done by the time he gets to the top. But you're rooting for him still, even though he could barely stand by the time he gets up there. And that is so Bruce, absolutely. Um, Speaking of movies that are puzzle pieces, or that these movies have come up as puzzle pieces on, I wanted to include one movie that I've done an episode of piecing it together on over the last 6 years, where Die Hard came up. And speaking of The Rock, it's not the best movie in the world, but it's Skyscraper. I
Skyscraper,
wanted
okay.
to include on the list. If that's not, let's try to bring Die Hard to a new generation with whoever the new big star is of the moment. I don't know what is. That is just The Rock trying to do Die Hard. There's some fun to be had in the movie. It wasn't a total failure, and I think it did actually pretty well. I don't remember the exact box office, but that was certainly like right in the middle of The Rock can do no wrong era, where all of his movies were making pretty damn good business. And
Mhm.
yeah, everything about it is set up to evoke Die Hard. I feel like, from the lone, normal guy, even though he's the Rock size, going into this building and having to withstand all these enemies and try to outsmart them while also trying to outfight them all at the same time. And like you said, The Rock, he doesn't get punched or hit very often, so maybe he's not the bloody pulp by the end, but at least he's still standing and he saves the day. So
I love it. Excellent choice. Yeah, you can't use the word relatable for Dwayne Johnson that often, but
right,
Skyscraper is the closest he came.
yeah,
He's never gonna be the everyman, obviously.
yeah,
He's more often superhero, he looks like a superhero in normal situations, but Skyscraper is definitely one that made him feel human, borderline
yeah,
human at least. So,
yeah, sure,
all right, a lot of
absolutely.
pressure. 5th and final
Mm,
choice. Um,
hell yeah.
I wanted to find another McTiernan, and I almost went with a McTiernan that instead will set up what my final choice is going to be. The thing that makes Die Hard so special, I think, is it's the limitations of the location. You know, uh, John McClane can't leave. He can't leave the skyscraper, and he can try to get help to come to him at the Nakatomi Plaza, but he's forced to deal with the fact that he's trapped in this one location. And so, for that reason, my fifth piece is Tony Scott's Crimson Tide. If you can tell
Sure.
a story that's contained to a single location and still keep it compelling, I think that's a badge of honor. And submarine movies sort of lend that situation. But the way that Denzel Washington and Gene Hackman go at each other, is similar to me to the way that Rickman and Willis kind of go at each other. And while it's
Yeah,
a little more clear cut who's the villain in Die Hard, I feel in Crimson Tide, your allegiance shifts ever so slightly, to who's right here,
sure, sure.
and I love the fact that that keeps you guessing. And it's also one of those situations where, like, with Die Hard, the way that it's set up, you think to yourself, like, how is he going to prevail? It feels like the odds are too stacked against him, and I felt that way with Crimson Tide as well too. How are we gonna get out of this situation? What's the way out of this? And I even feel like knowing the ending, every time I go back and rewatch it, I'm in the middle of it, I'm always just like, "This is gonna go sour," like, there's no
Yeah,
way out of
yeah.
this. So I admire a great submarine movie. I think that the tension and the claustrophobia that was prevalent in Die Hard, how our hero felt like he has to stay here, he can't leave. That envelopes Crimson Tide, and so I think that's my 5th and final piece.
Yeah, it's a great one, and another movie I haven't seen in years, but I would love to revisit that sometime soon. But like, as far as like getting a director like that who is just so damn good at action in any space, but putting it in a tight space like that, and then getting some of these just titans of acting to like, square off against each other. And I do think that that's like some of the best stuff in Die Hard is, just the fact that you've got someone like Bruce Willis and someone like Alan Rickman going up against one another. It is just so much fun to watch and just infectious. And yeah, it's I think a big part of its staying power. So yeah, great piece there though. So I have two more things I want to mention. The first one is like my last main piece, and then I have kind of a bonus one. We got to talk about Die Hard as a Christmas thing. It's obviously
Yeah.
become this whole meme over the years. And so I wanted to include Fat Man on the list because Fat Man takes the promise of what if there was an action movie set at Christmas time, and isn't that hilarious that we're gonna call that a Christmas movie, and literally just
Yeah.
do it, just go for it. It's Santa Claus. It's Mel Gibson starring as Santa Claus. It is a very goofy, silly movie. Walton Goggins plays the bad guy who's mad at Santa, I believe, because he didn't get the right toy or something like that, which is it's
Yes.
it,
It's
it's a
it's
perfect
terrific.
setup. Yeah, it is
Yeah.
a perfect setup for like the promise of what a Christmas time action movie could be. And is Die Hard a Christmas movie? I mean, that's a question we could take an hour spending just talking about that. But regardless, it has inspired the idea of let's make some Christmas action movies, and I'm sure there's plenty more. It's not just Fat Man, but Fat Man is actually a pretty damn good one.
It really is. That movie shouldn't be as good as it is, but it's
Yeah,
wildly entertaining, probably because of
absolutely.
Goggins.
Yeah,
Goggins is
absolutely.
terrific.
He's so good. He's so fun. The other thing I wanted to mention, like I said, it's more of a bonus piece because it's not actually a movie any of us have seen yet. It's still shooting at the moment. I just wanted to show the influence of Die Hard continues on. And speaking of Gerard Butler, we brought him up earlier. He's going to be in a movie in 2025 called Empire State. With the director of Den of Thieves, he plays a Navy SEAL turned New York firefighter who happens to be in the Empire State Building when it gets attacked by terrorists. If that's not Die Hard, I mean, what are we doing? You know what I mean? So,
Yeah,
uh, yeah, it continues.
the formula lives.
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, we got into a lot of great stuff here. A lot of good action. Obviously a lot of stuff that's kind of trapped in that location, which is a big part. A lot of squaring off of just these awesome actors, hero and villain actors. But any closing thoughts? Anything we didn't quite bring up you wanted to mention about Die Hard?
N the scene that I think is my favorite in it, despite all the action that takes place, is when, John McClane finally, meets, Hans Gruber face to face.
Hmm.
And somebody tweeted this just in the past couple of days of like, this sequence should be taught in screenwriting classes,
Hmm.
like it doesn't all have to be explosions and gunfights. Um, Dialogue can be as suspenseful, and as riveting. And so I think part of the reason why Die Hard stands the test of time is because it takes the time to fully develop those characters so that conversations can be, the most compelling moments. And that's what makes this movie, that's what makes Die Hard really special. The action when it arrives delivers, but you care about the characters. And I wish more action movies, like a Lethal Weapon, where you invested in Riggs and Murtaugh, you cared about those characters.
Hmm.
I don't just want them to be, hunks of meat that pummel each other. That's for the Fast and Furious,
Sure.
Give us characters that we care about because that's what I think helps make Die Hard be really, really special and stands the test of time.
Yeah, I completely agree. And to that point, I think really when it comes down to it, all of our favorite part is Hans Gruber. Alan Rickman is just so much fun. And I think a villain who can thread that needle of fun and threatening at the same time is just so important. I mean, I think kind of a different genre, but I think of something like, Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards with, Christoph Waltz.
Mhm.
A character like that is so fun to watch, but is also terrifying at the
Mhm.
same time. Hans Gruber is kind of the ultimate character written in that style and performed in that style, and I think Alan Rickman is just so damn good, and that is a big part of why a movie like this kind of lives on.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
So I think that does it for Die Hard. Let's talk about your book a little bit. I mean, first of all, just kind of tell us a little bit more about it and, kind of what you get into in the pages of the book.
Sure, 100%. So the book was definitely inspired by Bruce announcing his retirement.
Hmm.
And when that was revealed, it hit me. It really hit me in a profound way of like, if he's going to stop acting, I wanted to sort of step back and ask why that matters, why that's important. And I started to look over his filmography. And again, this is someone who I've been, following as part of his career since the earliest days. I was a fan of Moonlighting, and I talked about how specific Die Hard was to me in terms of being an influential film. But as I analyzed his career, I really, was marveling over the number of genres that he would try to get himself into, and the chances that he took, and the directors who he went after, to collaborate with, and the big swings that he took, and had a bunch of misses, but never really derailed him necessarily. It
Hmm.
feels every single time I'm appearing on a different podcast to talk about Bruce, I'm reminding people of the number of films that he's in because you just forget. Like, you bring up like 12 Monkeys, Fifth Element, Armageddon, Death Becomes Her,
Mm.
the Expendables films, Red, the Red franchise. Uh, People think about Bruce Willis and they immediately go to Die Hard. But it's like he did so many things to escape the shadow of that film, to prove that he was so much more than just John McClane. And while any actor would kind of love to have a character like that on their resume, I feel like Bruce a little bit gets overshadowed because of the other things that he was able to do, his versatility.
Yeah.
Um, where he gets lumped into the Planet Hollywood group of Schwarzenegger and Stallone, like I would argue and try to in the book that those guys could never do something as quiet as The Sixth Sense
Hmm.
or Unbreakable. Um, I couldn't see Stallone in Pulp Fiction. I
Hmm.
think Bruce just had this versatility that gets overlooked. And while he could have just done John McClane for the rest of his career, I think eventually he found a way to really tap into the quietness, and his screen presence was so, commanding that the scene in Pulp Fiction where he first gets introduced and it's just Marcellus Wallace talking to him about why he's gonna throw the fight. It's a 7-minute sequence. It just focuses on Bruce's face.
Yeah.
For him to have the sheer, power of holding your attention, I think it's really rare. I think it's really unique. And so the book divides his career up into 5 different categories. It's his comedies, his action films, his science fiction films, the work he did with auteurs. Like, one thing I learned a lot in speaking to the different directors who worked with him is how much Bruce did to defend their ability to make the movies that they wanted to make.
Mm.
He championed directors like Terry Gilliam for 12 Monkeys. People forget that M. Night Shyamalan wasn't M. Night Shyamalan when he made The Sixth Sense.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
Ryan Johnson and Looper, Ryan Johnson hadn't yet done Star Wars or Breaking Bad and the Daniel Craig movies at this point now. And all of these guys stand up and say the amount of studio interference that they would have faced if they didn't have a bankable star. Bruce meant you were gonna get an opening weekend, and that's all that kinda matters in the business side of show business. And so once they got Bruce, if he believed in their script, he would defend their ability to make the type of movie that they wanted to make, and I kinda think that that's a rare quality now at this point.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of it being a rare quality, I mean, are there actors out there who are doing such a wide range? I feel like there isn't. Like, it's really hard to name anybody right now.
I think his only counterparts would be Harrison Ford probably.
Mm,
I think Ford mixes it up in different genres. The industry is so different though that even Ford, if he wants to go do, a Western that's a Yellowstone spinoff, he's gotta go to streaming, you know?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and, Bruce is a Paul Newman type,
yeah.
he's a character actor in a leading man role, and no, I don't think I saw a list recently that was like, these are the new up and coming stars, and none of them fit that quality. It's Austin Butler, it's Timothy Chalamet. Obviously, the industry changes, trends change, but I think Bruce would be relegated to, like, to a streaming service, now at this
Yeah.
point. And it's sad because just going through even all the directors that I mentioned, it doesn't even get into him going over and doing the Sin City films with Robert Rodriguez. Him comfortably fitting into an ensemble for a Wes Anderson film like Moonrise Kingdom. He truly just chased collaborations with filmmakers that he wanted to work with, and I don't know that other actors have that sort of cachet anymore.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's difficult. And yeah, like you said, like, everything is changing with the industry. So it's like there's really not necessarily room for that, even if somebody did pop up with the skills and the charisma to be able to pull it off. So it's a tough thing. You were just naming all of these roles and we just spent 30 minutes talking about Die Hard. Do you think Die Hard is the defining movie of his career, even though he's done so many different things?
It has to be,
Mhm.
if only because, when you think of Bruce, that's the first thing you think of,
Yeah.
and you almost have to be reminded of the other films. If it's not Die Hard, it's probably The Sixth Sense. But what's
Mhm.
crazy about this too, and I knew it, but didn't really think about it, but, like, Bruce would appear in these movies, and everyone around him would get nominated for Oscars.
Mm.
He's the only one from the Pulp Fiction ensemble that didn't get a nomination.
Wow,
Um,
yeah.
The Sixth Sense, the movie gets nominated, M. Night gets nominated for writer, Toni Collette and Haley Joel Osment get nominated, but, like, did Bruce not appear in that movie? I don't understand what happened.
That's crazy, and he sells, like, the big thing that everybody talks about at the end, you know? So, like, yeah, he's perfect in that movie, and, that's crazy that he didn't get, noticed for it.
Well, and then the other one is 12 Monkeys. Like,
Mhm.
Brad Pitt gets nominated for Chewing the Scenery, but if
Mm.
you go back and rewatch 12 Monkeys, if you haven't in a while, like, to me, Pitt is kinda wildly overacting, and Bruce is the one that holds that entire mystery to get like, that movie is this guy crazy or is he actually from the future, you know?
Yeah.
And you're watching it from his point of view of like, I don't know what to believe, so I'm paying attention to him, and he sells that entire movie.
Mhm.
And the Academy just because I think he's just linked to Die Hard, the Academy just views him as an action star, and they were never really willing to embrace him as a performer, and I think that that's such a crime.
Yeah, yeah. Well, for the book, did you, get to interview some cool people? You wanna, like, kinda mention any of those?
So, primarily, it was directors who worked with him. I knew I
Mhm.
wasn't gonna get a chance to actually speak to Bruce. I know his
Sure.
family is extremely private, and
Mm.
especially after the diagnosis, it feels like you know, they've circled the wagons of his camp.
Yeah.
I worked on 2 books prior to this, and they were very dependent on interviews happening. One was about the history of Spider-Man on film, and I wanted to speak to everybody who was involved in those films. The other one was about Zack Snyder's, Justice League movie and the problems that it went through, and I knew I needed Snyder in order to get that. So going into this, I wanted to make sure that I didn't have to be reliant on interviews to pull it off, so it's a lot of analysis.
Mhm.
But because of this podcast that I do called ReelBlend, we get directors on all the time, and so I've made friends with some of the directors who've worked with Bruce closely, and so I've got Quentin Tarantino in there, and Ryan Johnson, and M Night, and some of his co-stars, Matt Damon and Emily Blunt. Got a chance to interview them on
Nice.
behalf of this book, and speaking to them about their collaborations with Bruce. And so much of again that the takeaway that I got from so many of them is just how incredible he was at if he got your script and believed in it, he was gonna defend you tooth and nail to make the vision that you wanted, and I think that that's such a commendable thing for him.
Yeah, that those must have been great, conversations because I can't imagine any of them have, like, a bad word to say, like, they must all have just really cherished those collaborations, for a lot of the reasons we've talked about throughout this conversation here.
Well, Damon is involved in what I think is my favorite Bruce Willis scene, which is from Ocean's 12,
Oh,
where
nice.
plays himself, recognizing Julia Roberts, who's playing Tess, who's pretending to be Julia Roberts, and it's just this incredible, Rubik's Cube puzzle of comedy that Steven Soderbergh puts together. And it, again, only really works if Bruce is aware of the joke,
Sure.
and willing to sort of poke fun at himself. And that's something rare also, that you get with these A-listers. They're usually so protective of their image, but Bruce is willing to, plunge himself in the middle of that joke if it makes it better.
Absolutely, absolutely. And speaking of your other books, I did want to ask you, talking about a book on Spider-Man, a book on the Snyder Cut, and now a book on Bruce Willis. Does that make Bruce Willis a superhero?
Yes, but also he's the everyman
Yeah.
superhero. I never want
Yes.
to lump him into that, invincible category, because what makes
Hmm.
Bruce is that he's not afraid to be bruised
Mm.
and pummeled. I guess for that reason, Unbreakable is the best superhero movie ever made
Yeah. For a
because
long time, I would have said that. Absolutely. I might still say that, honestly. I love that movie.
oh,
So,
it's terrific.
yeah, so
Terrific.
good. So good. Well, I did want to ask you if there's anything you can talk about. Are there other topics, movies, actors that you're interested in writing about?
I'm circling a couple of the projects. And again, it's running into a situation where they're so reliant on cast members sitting down and talking.
Hmm.
I put a lot of work into potentially doing a book about the Goonies, coming up on its 40th anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bunch of behind the scenes making of stories about the Goonies that are insane. And if I can get enough stuff on record, I would like to sort of explore that. The other one that I'm kind of circling, which is an underrated movie that I love, is Tom Hanks's directorial debut, That Thing You Do.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
I play in a band. I'm fascinated by the rise and fall of kind of one hit wonders, and I think that movie captures a lot of the magic of that.
Yep.
And I find it odd that Tom Hanks directed an incredible movie and then made Larry Crown, which didn't do quite as well, and then just gave up directing. And I
Yeah.
I want to find out why. So these are just some ideas I'm batting around.
Yeah, those are both really interesting ideas. I'd love to see those come to fruition. But yeah, I think that does it for this. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk Die Hard and talk about your book. Tell people where they can find you and the book and everything else you're up to.
Sure. So I'm the managing director of CinemaBlend. You can go there every day for your entertainment needs. I have a podcast that comes out once a week called ReelBlend that I host with two of my really close friends, Jake Hamilton and Kevin McCarthy. We have a lot of directors on the show as guests. Our most recent one is George Miller, who is talking about Furiosa, which is in
Nice.
theaters right now. And then the book, the Bruce Willis book, comes out on June 11th. It is the ideal Father's Day gift for the dad who loves movies, and Bruce, cheap plug. And the other two books, my Spider-Man book is called With Great Power. My Zack Snyder book is called Release the Snyder Cut, and they are all available, all the different places you get your book needs met, Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all those different places.
Awesome. Everybody go check those out. And Sean, thank you so much for doing the show. Maybe we'll get you back again sometime.
I would love to, David. This was a blast. Thank you.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about Die Hard. Thank you so much to Sean O'Connell for joining me on that one. And thank you to all of you for listening. If you're enjoying piecing it together, make sure you are subscribed wherever it is that you're listening, because like I said, we got a lot of episodes on the way, so you'll get them as they come out, and it helps make sure that we get to keep doing this show as long as more people keep subscribing. So get subscribed and maybe drop us a little 5-star rating and review while you're at it. It would be very helpful to get the show out there and get more people to check it out. You could also follow us on social media at Piecing Pod and join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces. It's a fun little community of movie lovers. I keep it closed so we keep all the trolls and internet riffraff out, and it's just people who love talking about movies. Check it out. Again, it's called Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces on Facebook. You could also check out the Patreon I told you about at the top of the show, patreon.com/bydavidrosen. Lots of great stuff over there. And that's all the stuff you got to check out. A lot of stuff, but maybe get in touch if you ever want to join me for an episode. You could do that too. It's another thing. We got lots of calls to action on this one. But anyway, let's close this out with a piece of music, like I always do on this show. And I was trying to think, as far as movies inspired by Die Hard, are there any films that I scored that were inspired by Die Hard? And I remembered this one short called Lido that I scored. God, this must be 10 years ago already at this point. But it's a short film about these criminals who they have this whole scheme to rob this safe in this office building, and it's got this like really cool. It's almost, I would say, also like a little bit of like an Ocean's 11 type thing. But anyway, this is a really cool short that I don't know if it's available online to watch, but this is part of the score from that short, and definitely had some Die Hard influence in the making of the film. So this is the score from Lido. Hope you enjoy it. We'll be back with more piecing it together real soon.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.